All right, so when we talk about photography, we want to talk about how we arrange things within the frame of the four sides of the photograph. Most of the time it's going to be rectangular. So when we think about composition, we're thinking about what an image is composed of. So if you think about a song, a musical composition, then every note, every beat is going to be part of that composition. And if something is out of tune or off key, you're going to notice that it kind of throws off the composition. The same is true with photography. You want to think about where everything goes and what's included or what is not included. And if there's something that's distracting, even if you didn't plan for that, it's part of the image. So we're going to look at some of these rules of photo composition. But at the same time, when I think about the rules of composition, I think about this video. It's a little bit long. Hopefully you don't fall asleep from it. But let me play this here real quick.
The code is more what you call guidelines than actual rules.
Did you catch that? All right, let me play it one more time.
The code is more what you call guidelines than actual rules.
So some of you might be thinking about art and photography and thinking like, hey, isn't it just like everybody's whatever they like is fine, and that's art, and it's subjective, and you can't really make rules around it? That's partially true, but there's definitely some kind of widely accepted concepts that help photographers get started. And then once you get a good grasp on those, then you can start to deviate from those a little bit and experiment with things, breaking some of those rules. So at first glance, when we look at this picture, see for a second if you think there's any particular fish that you think stands out to you the most. So my guess is maybe it's this one that's got the least distinct pattern on it, so it kind of makes it feel a little bit different than the others. But then what happens if I do this? Now which one is the focal point? This is where your eye is drawn to first. The focal point is wherever your eye goes first within a photograph or a work of art. And you might think, well, if I have a lot of something in the picture, that's going to make it the focal point. Well, the opposite is actually true. If you have a lot of these blue fish, and then you put one little goldfish in there, that suddenly becomes your focal point, and that becomes the most eye-catching part of your image. Here's another example of a photograph where it's a very simple image, but a very clear focal point. You have this silhouette of the figure on the cliff here. You're not always going to be able to get, I don't think you'll get this picture over at Brunswick Lake. But this is giving you some ideas of how your eye is drawn to that specific area. Pretty obvious, right? Look at how this one is a simple image. Look at these cool textures of the fabric and the golden yellow color of the flower standing out from the darker blues. Pretty neat. So once you've established the idea that you want something to be your clearest focal point, even if it's a busy image, you want to have something that directs your eye first. You generally want to use what we call the rule of thirds. And if you look here, you have this like tic-tac-toe grid. That's the easiest way to remember the rule of thirds. It basically says we're going to put the focal point at one of these intersections and avoid the middle as a result. Okay. Here's another example that even the horizon line is kind of close to that lower rule of thirds. His head, it's not exactly on that point. Sometimes it feels a little bit forced if it's exactly at that point, but it does give you a good idea of how to use that rule of thirds here. Kind of a funny one. And then that leads us to number 3, avoid the middle. Avoid the middle. And there may be times when we want it to be in the middle. But even then, we probably don't want it directly in the middle. I'll show you some future images that break this rule a little bit. But here we have the rule of thirds in application, and it's working pretty nice and makes it a little bit more interesting. The reason for that is our brain just kind of reads it as like static and not quite as exciting if it's just right in the middle. Now, you might not think this particular photo is super exciting anyways, but it makes it more interesting to have it asymmetrically balanced, where you have this on one side balanced by this larger open space on the other. picture from a past project that a student had done, and you can see that the figure is off to the side. Another past student project. Simplify the scene. Simplify the scene. So when we look at something, I could look at my phone and read something on my phone or be scrolling through pictures and not pay attention to anything in the background. But a camera is going to capture anything that is in the frame, even if you don't want it to be. So you want to look for ways to simplify it. That could be by shooting down or up, changing your angle or perspective. But simplifying the scene is a very important thing to consider. You can get closer, kind of crop in on things. You can look for different perspectives that will make that focal point really stand out. So here you see that texture really standing out nicely. Here you have this limited colors, right? These greens and then this pop of this kind of orange-red from a past student project. A silhouette, sky in the background, right? Out of focus, shallow depth of field in the background. Pretty cool. I recently found this photographer on Instagram, and here's their Instagram tag or handle. And I thought it was pretty cool. They showed what they originally photographed and then what they cropped it to. So here you can see they're even, like this is a pretty simple image. I would say that's pretty good as far as simplifying the scene. But this, you just really see this drama of the turf pellets or whatever those are kicking up from the action. And again, you're avoiding the middle, and it's a pretty neat image. Here's another example, simplifying the scene. This was the original. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend cropping in this much on most of your images, but this guy has a killer camera that shoots probably 3 times as many pixels as ours do, and he can crop in and still keep that detail. Filling the frame is a similar one as far as like just getting in tight, but it's a little different, a little bit more specific that you're getting in close to the subject. If you look at this image of the catcher, the baseball catcher, think for a second, where is the focal point? Where is the focal point? I would argue that his eye is what catches our attention the most. And it has this kind of framing of the mask around. Now this is not going to be necessarily in the newspaper like this, right? They might want to capture a dramatic moment, but you do see this like pensive, like he's thinking about what's going to happen next. And it's around the rule of thirds, right? Okay, again, filling the frame, same idea from that same photographer. Past student project, really focusing in on some of the unique details. Look at how they're shooting through the grass here, really, really tight up, rule of thirds. Number 6 is leading lines. Leading lines is a really powerful one. You have the obvious lines of the fence, but you also have the lines of the horizon line, kind of pointing you towards this figure. Now, if this figure had more contrast, if this figure was like really dark, then that would make it an even stronger focal point, but you have enough here leading you in this direction. Now, one thing to be clear about, these lines, are these leading lines? These are not leading lines because they're not actually pointing you towards the focal point. Even these are, maybe these could get away with it a little bit. What about the fence? The wires are. The posts, they kind of almost, if you squint, they almost work like this converging line pointing you in that direction. Here's an obvious one. Look at how they break the rule of avoiding the middle. Pretty much central. But they capitalize on that by having this symmetrical geometric design, and it's still not right here in the middle. It's on the top third of the image. Here's some boards that are kind of pointing you towards this figure. Again, kind of breaks the rule of avoiding the middle, but it's worth it to include this cool texture on the image. You have this rock kind of pointing you, this shadow pointing you. Look at this little like pointed shape right here of the dark area. Things that you have to kind of train your eye to, but you have these leading lines and shapes pointing you towards the focal point. The last one we're going to cover in this specific video is framing. Framing is actually like my favorite one that is like destined to elevate the quality of your picture, or like the professional creative look of your picture. So framing is basically putting your focal point and framing it by something else that is in the scene. So framing it by this bridge. And look at how there's leading lines here too. And later on we'll talk about pattern. Here's through like this kind of cliff rock face. Here's a great example. Think about this. If you were here, most people would take their camera and look right through this so that it wasn't obstructing the view. But this particular photographer made the creative decision to say, I'm going to use the balance and the symmetry of this, again, breaking the rule of avoiding the middle, but I'm going to use this to create a sense of depth and scale and make this stand out. Okay, here's an example where a student went really low into the grass, and there's this kind of framing that occurs from this blade of grass around it. Good question here. Leading lines. Where do you see leading lines? I would say maybe this is your most prominent one, pointing you towards the figure. The rest, maybe this a little bit. The rest is the framing that's being created. You have something that's movement towards that, but is this a leading line? Not really. Not really. They're not pointing you towards the focal point. All right, framing. Look at this shadow and then the rocks, creating a cool silhouette. A simplified scene here. A lot of good things that went on with this photo. Cool angle, cool texture. All right, let's stop here. There are some more rules of composition that we will talk about in the future, but I think this is plenty for today. Let me know if you have questions.